Hello, my name is Kamjan Gary and I chose the topic about memory, or more specifically, the topic about false memory. What it is, what causes it, how it affects us, what are the research done about false memory, and how this information would help us, not only on the job we're pursuing, but also to our daily lives. My sources in this topic is supported by two researchers, which are an article named False Memory, created by Cara Laney and Elizabeth Lotus, who talked about what false memory is, studies concerning false memory, dismantling other studies that claims people can repress memory and remember with 100% accuracy, and also implanting false memory. Also, the other article that I chose is an article named Human Memory Research, Current Hypothesis and New Perspective by Antonio Jaeger, Cesar Galera, Lillian Stein, and Ederaldo Jose Lopez, where they talk about the contribution of emotion to false memory. So, let's talk about false memory. So Cara talks about the existence of false memory. According to Cara Laney, human memory can hold an amazing amount of information, but it is far more than a mere storage device for records of experiences. Memory is a set of dynamic processes. These processes work very well most of the time, but are also susceptible to distortion in some cases. Suggestion can even lead to people to remember complete detailed events that never happened. So, with false memory, people can either remember two things. Either it's a whole different situation, or it's the same memory, but the details are different. So when I was studying law, my teacher showed us an example of how by using the read technique, police interrogators can convince people that they committed a crime they did not commit by providing them with false memory. Here is an example. She was being accused of killing her husband by drowning him. Her husband drowned kayaking, and the police are accusing her of removing the cap from the kayak that caused his husband to drown. But the investigation led to a conclusion that removing the cap of the kayak would not result for the husband to drown. And also, she was the one who called 911 for help in order to save her husband. But after 11 hours of interrogation, police convinced her that she committed the crime by saying that she was the one who removed the cap. Although appealing as a metaphor, memory does not actually function like a video recorder. When we talk about memory, we always talk it like a memory in our phone or a memory in a recorder, but it doesn't work like that. Memory is far more complex than this. The misinformation effect occurs when misleading information presented after an event is incorporated to an individual's memory for the event. So Patterson and Kemp made a study where they introduced people to different situations, and interestingly, when asked to recall, they remembered information that wasn't there, like a stop sign or an unmade bed being made. So these are researchers that manages to make an experiment to prove that people can have false memory. So what I'm about to say is taken from the text. In spite of research showing that memory can be malleable, many clinicians and some researchers seem to believe that some QPEs of memory are completely immune to distortion. They claim that some memories, particularly memories for traumatic events like child sexual abuse, can be buried in the subconscious for years, or even decades, and then spring to consciousness untouched by time. So these traumatic events are claimed to be repressed and suddenly remembered with 100% accuracy. But as we all know, even traumatic memories are subject to distortion. So here's a research made by Breer and Kont, where 450 patients were asked if there were a time where they could not remember their abuse, and the majority replied yes. And so, writers use this as an evidence for memory repression. But why would the person have tried to remember the abuse? unless he or she already knew that there had been abuse. If the person knew that there had been abuse, then how can he or she said to have fully repressed it? Here's another example of a research where people talk about repressed memory. So one classic example is that of William in 1994. William found a group of 129 women that she knew had been abused 17 years previously because she had access to hospital records documenting the reported abuse. So this 129 women said that some of their memories are repressed, but there are a lot of things that's wrong with the research. So 38% failed to report a specific documented case of abuse, even when questioned specifically about sexual abuse. So 38% are gone because they're not qualified to be in the research. And then 68% of the women who forgot the specific case of abuse nonetheless reported the instance of abuse, which suggests that the documented instance of abuse may have simply been as less memorable than the other. Finally, many of these women may have failed to report the abuse because they did not want the label to be abused. As such, we argue that the 38% of women who failed to report the abuse in William's study did not necessarily repress their memories for the abuse. And indeed, they did not even necessarily forget the abuse. Instead, they simply failed to report the abuse. So if this memory is for excuse me. So if these memories for traumatic events like sexual abuse have not actually been repressed and recovered, then where have they come from? There's now more than decades worth of research showing that it's possible to implant wholly false memory into people's mind. So, a study held by Luftus and Pickrell. So 3 real childhood events were given to people, 2 subjects of course, and 1 slightly traumatic event where they were lost in a mall. 25% of them remembered that they were lost in the mall, but according to their parents, they were never lost. This example with remember you were being hospitalized overnight, or remembering you were attacked by a dog, or have a serious accident which did not actually happen. The point is that hundreds of studies are made to prove that false memory happens every day in our daily lives, and people who knows of this use it to their advantage. Learning what causes false memory is important to maintain healthy relationship with our surroundings. For example, I'm taking power engineering. And why is knowing false memory important to me? It's because power engineering is mostly centered on gathering data. And when I remembered those data wrong, then it could cause a catastrophic failure to our boilers and also to my job. And next, we're going to talk about the contribution of emotion to false memory. There is a long history of investigation on how emotions influences memory. Riceberg and Hoover of 2007. So, emotional stimuli tend to increase the retention of both central details and the gist of events. Such felicitation, however, does not necessarily result in accurate memories. So, it's called the phenomenon of flashbulb memory. So, for example, let's talk about the 9/11. So, according to a study by Talarico and Rubin, because 9/11 is a traumatic event, and of course it's an emotional event, people tend to remember this, right? People remember this, but they tend to remember this vividly. Like they don't know much of the detail. So this is one example of how emotion can affect memory, false memory. The issue of whether or not memories for emotional valence items are suggestible, the distortion was also investigated by laboratory studies. Some of the studies have used this Roediger-McDermott paradigm, or the DRM paradigm. So this paradigm is very simple. So people, an interviewer and people were sitting in a room, and the interviewer would say words like let's say bed, clothes, pillows, dreams, and so on and so forth. And the subjects would be asked to say those words again. And in one of the studies, subjects tends to say that they remember the word sleep, where the word sleep was not in the words, but the words that are related to sleep are in the words, like pillow and blankets and bed. So they remember that sleep is being in the word, but it wasn't. So false memories in short-term task contribution. An open question regarding FMS is whether such phenomenon is circumscribed to long-term memory. So of course we ask that, are these false memory gonna be in our lives forever? And the answer is a bit more complicated than that. But we know that certain parts of our brain contributes to false memory. So these are the prefrontal cortex regions, or PFC. So in the PFC regions, such as the left ventrolateral PFC and dorsolateral PFC, they are involved in cognitive control during resolution of semantic interference. Decrease in the activity of these regions during false recognition may suggest that false memories are a consequence of reduced recognition control. Cognitive control processes supported by the left dorsolateral PFC are responsible for the maintenance of accuracy, i.e., they prevent false recognition. So emotions contribute greatly to false memory, since we want to remember the best, and we want to remember less as much as possible of the worst ones of our memory. So memory is really important in our lives. It's really important every day, of course. So here's I once asked my classmates what is the most important thing in a war, and they answered things like weapons, people, leadership, money, territory, and terrain. But I think the most important thing is information. It is the best weapon we could have in a war that could turn the tide of battle. And everyday life is a battle, and our memory is our information. Knowing more about our memory helps us fight the everyday life. So that is my presentation on false memory. And here are the APA formats for the two researchers that helped me into this presentation. They really help a lot, especially when explaining about the false memory, on how it happens and how it affects us, and also the different studies that they provided was really helpful in order for me to know that all the studies of false memory were explicit and detailed, and that people are really looking forward into solving and helping people that suffers from false memory.